Hey everybody, going to do things a little different today. We're talking about Murder at the ABA, which is an Isaac Asimov book from the 1970s. Murder at the ABA is not the best Isaac Asimov book, and it we'll get to that in a minute, but a little bit about it for background. Isaac Asimov was sort of this guy who wrote more books than anybody in his peer group, more published short stories, you name it. He had it out there somewhere. He probably published a book about every month at one point, just because he was so kind of quick to do these things. He was so fast at it. But he had science fiction, he had nonfiction, he had short stories, he had kind of every category in the book world covered, except for one, murder mysteries, right? So he wrote this book called Murder at the ABA, that's my first edition copy of it. I've read a number of times, and this time I haven't read it since probably the late 90s, early 2000. And I wanted to go back and give it a reread before I did the video, because it was published in 1976. And I've discovered that since I've started writing books, I look at them a little differently when I read them than I did. And I wanted to make sure I wasn't looking at it with sort of, rose tinted glasses. Um, the concept of the book was interesting. It was to put a murder at a convention of the American Booksellers Association. So there's all these publishers, all these bookstore owners, all these writers around, a bunch of speeches, some talks, some panels, autographing sessions. It stars this character named Darius Just, who was actually modeled after a friend of Isaac Asimov's named Harlan Ellison, who was also a writer in sort of speculative fiction. Now, Harlan Ellison was known for being kind of combative in a lot of ways. Not like he would punch people, but he wasn't. He was one of those guys that just loved to argue. And Darius Just is kind of like that in the book. Now, one thing I will point out is that this book has not aged well at all. As a writer, when I first read it, my dad suggested to me long before he passed away, and I read it, and he was like, "Oh, wasn't it cute?" I'm like, "It was cute," but that was sort of through the late 2000s. It was sort of with different filter on than I have today. And if you read it, it's sort of the way Asimov writes female characters. It's not good. He spends a lot of time describing various parts of their anatomy, and I'm like, just kind of almost cringeworthy in ways. He's very critical of women just primarily just for their appearance and almost nothing else, at least in this book. He's not that way in others, but in this book, it really kind of came out. So it kind of made it like, I hate to use the popular word cringy, but it was kind of difficult in a few spots to read. Now, one of the interesting things about it was he has all these writers, and writers sitting around talking about books is some sort of an interesting thing to do. And I never realized it until I was a writer. But writers can be very critical of one another in some ways and very helpful of one another in other ways. And one of the things I found humorous was he had some not so successful writers sitting around talking about how trashy the bestsellers were. He's like, oh, they sold out, they went commercial, it's not good writing, it's terrible writing. Okay, people are buying it, but it's not good writing. It's not a good book. It's just a popular book. He points out that bestseller lists can be manipulated, and one of the ways to become a bestseller is to be a bestseller. So if you accidentally get put on a bestseller list, all of a sudden people start buying the thing. If you get a bookstore to put a giant stack of them near the register, it doesn't have to be good, but it's right there. People will buy it. So he points out a bunch of weird things in the book business that I found kind of cute. As far as a murder mystery goes, it's not a great one. It's not necessarily the best one in the world. It's not paced quickly, and it's only 220 pages or something, but it kind of moves slow, and there are a few parts of it where you're just kind of like, that's not good writing. I think he cranked it out fast, and certainly the way he dealt with female characters was not good, not good at all. Now, if I had to rate it, sort of give it an out of 10 rating, if you would have asked me before this reread, I would have probably given it a sort of 7 out of 10. After this reread, I'll give it more like a 3. It is very much a product of its time. It was written in the mid 1970s, so keep that in mind if you do decide to read it. But there he is, the godfather of science fiction. He wrote a ton of them. Some of them were great, some of them were not so great. This was neither science fiction nor great. So Sorry, this one I didn't particularly like. But there you have it. Everybody have a great night. Click like, subscribe, or follow, and we'll talk to you.